The road ended in dust and silence. Nothing marked the turnoff, just two leaning fence posts without a gate, and a track so thin it vanished between the dying mesquite. The wind had been blowing since morning, and by afternoon, the sun looked pale behind a scrim of yellow grit. It wasn't the kind of place a man stumbled on. You had to already be lost to find it. James rode slow. He didn't rush. Never did. His mare was lathered from the long trail south, but he let her pick the pace. Saddle creaked, rifle strapped at his back, canteen swinging at his hip. He hadn't spoken a word in 3 days, not even to the horse. There hadn't been a reason. Until he heard the cry. It wasn't loud. Just a soft, hitching sound, more like wind caught in something hollow. But James stilled in his saddle, turned his head, and listened. Another cry. Then silence. Then two, soft, newborn whimpers, wrapped inside winter's edge. He dismounted, tied the mare to a bare trunk, and stepped forward through a stand of dried sagebrush and rotted fence slats. The air smelled like rust and pine tar, like old neglect. And then he saw her. A woman. Tied upright to a splintered post, arms behind her, dress ripped down the sleeve, dried blood on her temple. Her face was half-shadowed beneath loose strands of dark hair, tangled like roots. She didn't look at him. Didn't move. Her eyes were open, vacant as dusk. At her feet, wrapped tight in an old horse blanket, 2 infants. Pink-cheeked, fussing weakly. Twin girls, no older than a day or 2. One of them sucked on the corner of the cloth. The other blinked slowly, as if the world had already tired her. James didn't speak. He crouched. Her lips moved slightly. A cracked sound passed through them, dry as gravel. Don't take them. He unhooked his hunting knife. Moved slow. Cut the rope binding her wrists. Her hands dropped like stones. She swayed once, then collapsed, and he caught her. She was light, feather-light. No more than bones and silence. He looked down the hill. There was an old homestead, house half collapsed, smoke still faint in the chimney. No sign of people now. But they'd been there. The ropes were too fresh. James gathered the twins first. He placed them in his saddle blanket, and slung it carefully around his chest. Then he lifted the woman, arms beneath her knees and back, and carried her like something breakable toward the mare. "You're comin' with me," he said. Not loud. Just steady. Like a promise. She didn't answer. The ride back was slow. He walked the mare to keep the babies from jostling. The woman's head lolled against his chest once, and he adjusted the blanket tighter. Snowflakes had started to fall again, lazy, wide ones that stuck to eyelashes and drifted into coat collars. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky had folded in on itself. It wasn't a large place, just one main room with a stove in the corner, and a cot near the window. James kicked open the door with a boot and carried her inside. The warmth hit like a whisper, soft and real. The babies whimpered louder now. One of them flailed her little fists. Hungry. He moved with quiet efficiency. Laid the woman down on his cot, checked her for bleeding. He found more bruises than cuts. Her ankles were raw where the rope had dug in. One eye was beginning to swell. Her dress was torn near the bodice, but he looked away. He covered her with the quilt. Then he built the fire higher, set water to boil, and pulled out the last of the goat's milk from a tin. He mixed it with rainwater, and warmed it in 2 small jars. The twins drank greedily, tiny mouths working fast, eyes fluttering shut. Only when they slept did James sit back. He didn't sleep that night. He sat near the fire, watching her chest rise and fall. Her name was still unknown. Her story too. But it didn't matter. Not yet. He remembered the look on her face when he'd found her. Not fear. Not even shame. Just surrender. like someone who'd stopped expecting to be rescued. In the gray of morning, she stirred, groaned once, turned her head toward the cradle where the twins now lay, swaddled in his old shirt. Her eyes opened. She looked at him. He was crouched nearby, still in yesterday's clothes, hair wet from snow. She took in the room, slowly, like she was waking into a different life. "You didn't leave us," she whispered. He shook his head. She tried to rise and winced. Her voice cracked. "They said I wasn't worth feeding. Said girls bring no dowry. That I should have died giving birth." James didn't reply. He dipped a cloth in warm water and offered it to her. She pressed it to her cheek with trembling fingers. Then she looked at him fully. "You're not afraid of what people say? Taking in a woman like me? With 2 daughters and no husband?" James tilted his head. "You're safe. That's all that matters." She didn't cry, but something in her eyes softened. A shimmer of disbelief. He didn't ask more. Just stood, stoked the fire, and laid out bread on a tin plate. She watched him move across the room like a man who'd been alone too long, but hadn't grown cruel from it. His silence wasn't hard, it was gentle like snowfall. Outside, a crow called once and flew off. Inside, the babies stirred. She winced as she sat up straighter, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. Her voice was thin. "My name's Nora." James turned. Nodded. She looked at the fire, not him. "Don't know how to thank you, mister." He looked away as he answered. "James." That was all. No family name. No town. Just James. The quiet stretched. Then the wind changed direction. Blew the snow against the cabin windows like whispers trying to get in. Nora leaned forward, the quilt pooling in her lap. "You should know," she said slowly. "They'll come looking. His family. They won't like that you took me." James didn't turn. "I don't much care what men like that think." The fire popped once. Sparks flew. She watched him, studied him like he was a riddle. And then, so quietly it barely reached his ears, she said, "Then I think I'm safe here." James didn't move, but something in his shoulders loosened. Later that night, as she fed the twins by firelight, he stepped outside. Snow fell in thin sheets, brushing his hair, wetting his collar. The sky stretched wide and empty above the pines. And for the first time in years, James felt it. Not joy. Not hope. Just something like purpose. He looked back at the light glowing through the cabin window. She was still there. The girls were still breathing. And maybe, just maybe, this road wasn't ending after all. It was just turning. The fire never went out. Not once in the 6 days since James brought her in. He rose before the sun and added wood in the blue hush of dawn. He stirred the embers at dusk. He fed it between chores without being asked. Nora noticed, though he never spoke of it. Just as she noticed how he stepped outside whenever she undressed the babies, giving her space like it was sacred. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was deliberate. As if they both knew too many words might scare the peace away. By the end of the first week, Nora could walk without swaying. The bruises on her neck faded from purple to yellow. Her wrist, once rope-burned and raw, now bent without pain. She wore James's spare flannel, rolled at the sleeves, and a skirt she stitched from 2 patched-up pillowcases. It didn't fit right, but she didn't complain. Her voice when she spoke was always careful, like someone afraid of using too much air. The twins, she called them her little snowbirds, slept more now. Grew pinker in the cheeks. James carved 2 wooden rattles out of pine scraps without telling her. He left them on the windowsill one morning and said nothing. When Nora found them, her hand hovered over the carved flowers on the handles. Her mouth parted slightly, like she might cry, but she didn't. She tucked them into the cradle and returned to folding cloth. That was how they spoke. In gestures. Each day, James rode out before noon, always returning by dark. He'd come back with feed, chopped wood, or bits of cloth from town. Nora never asked what he did. She guessed ranch work, maybe some trading. But deep down, she wondered if he was keeping their presence quiet. Protecting them. The town hadn't come calling yet. But silence had a way of building like storm clouds. One morning, she asked if he needed help with anything. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, that long steady look he gave things he wasn't sure how to handle. Then he handed her a bucket and nodded toward the well. She smiled for the first time in days. The weight of the bucket grounded her. Her body was still weak, but her steps grew firmer with purpose. Outside, the air smelled like thawing snow and pine. Ravens flew low between branches, their wings silent but heavy. Nora filled the bucket, spilling some on her skirt. She didn't mind. When she turned to head back, she saw Mrs. Eveline Parrish standing near the road with a mule and a face full of questions. Eveline was the kind of widow who believed her presence alone was a gift. She had sharp eyes, whittled-down lips, and a bonnet she never removed, even in windstorms. Her mule wore a bright red blanket, stitched with her initials. She always brought jam when she visited, though it tasted more like vinegar than berries. "Well," Eveline said, eyeing the twins' cloths drying on the porch line, "you look far too alive for someone buried by her husband's kin." Nora tightened her grip on the bucket. Eveline's eyes narrowed. "Is James inside?" Nora nodded. Eveline stepped closer. Her voice dropped like a stone in a still pond. "People are talking Mississippi. About him keeping you here. With 2 babies. With no name." Nora stared at her. "My name is Nora." Eveline sniffed. "A name don't carry much if you got no ring on your finger, dear." She turned toward the house with a smirk that curled sharp. "Tell James the first brought more flour. Thought he might need it, feeding 3 mouths now." Then she mounted her mule and rode off, slowly, deliberately, leaving Nora with the sting of shame burning her ears. James came out moments later, having seen from the window. He didn't speak. Just took the bucket and carried it inside. That night, Nora sat long after the babies slept. She didn't sew. Didn't rock in the chair. Just stared into the fire while James fixed the hinge on the cabin door. Finally, she spoke. "They'll never stop reminding me I'm not welcome." James didn't stop working. "You're welcome here." She shook her head. "Not here. Not in this town. Not in any town." He paused. Laid the hinge down gently on the table. "I don't answer to towns." Her hands curled into fists in her lap. "You don't know what it's like. To be treated like something filthy because you gave birth to girls. Like you're a mouth no one wants to feed. A burden wrapped in skin." James stared at her. Then in the slowest, calmest voice he said, "I know what it's like to be alone so long you stop hearing your own name." She looked up. "I know what it's like to have people point at your silence and call it wrong," he continued. "To be stared at like a question no one wants answered." The fire crackled between them. "I ain't never had to raise babies," he said, nodding toward the cradle. "But I know enough to see they're not curses." Nora's eyes burned. James reached into his coat pocket and slid something across the table toward her. It was a jar of sweet cream from town. "I heard you missed it," he said softly. Nora pressed her lips together. She didn't cry. Just nodded once and took the jar in both hands like it was something holy. The next morning, she found him outside, hammering in posts along the fence line. Without a word, she brought him water. Then stayed to hand him nails. Side by side, in cold wind, they worked. He didn't speak. But she could feel something shift between them, like the rope tethering her soul to the world had found a second knot. One afternoon, she found a book on the mantel. A small, worn volume of Psalms. Inside the cover was scrawled in faded ink, "To James. From your mother. For when silence gets heavy." Nora turned a few pages. The verses were underlined, notes in the margins. The pages smelled like pine and dust. James stepped in behind her. "I didn't know you read scripture," she said softly. "Only the verses that feel like songs." She smiled. That night, the wind picked up, and the twins wouldn't settle. One cried until her voice cracked. James, without being asked, scooped her into his arms and paced the cabin slowly, whispering something Nora couldn't hear. Eventually, both girls slept again. And when he turned toward Nora, he looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. As if the bruises weren't the only thing healing. But he said nothing. Just nodded and returned to his seat by the fire. She sat across from him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. A silence stretched between them, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of fear. The silence of something blooming. Unspoken. Hopeful. Still unnamed. And in that quiet, Nora breathed easier. Her hands stopped trembling when she reached for the cradle. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving in someone else's shadow. She was building something here. Something not yet spoken, but real. James watched her from across the room. Eyes calm. As if waiting, not rushing, for her to come back to herself in her own time. Outside, snow flurried against the window, but inside, the fire kept burning. And the silence was warm. The season turned in whispers. Winter's grip loosened little by little, not with fanfare but with subtle signs. The distant chirp of a bird returning, the drip of thawing ice off the roof's edge, the faint scent of pine needles awakening beneath the melt. The cabin, once shrouded in snow, now stood with patches of earth appearing like freckles on its shoulders. Life was coming back, but it was slow and hesitant, like someone walking home after a long exile. Inside, the girls grew stronger. They babbled now, small mouths forming sounds that weren't quite words, but full of purpose. Nora's days passed with rocking, feeding, folding, humming. Her hands had become steadier, her steps sure. She wore her hair differently now, tied back loosely with the faded ribbon James had brought from town. Her cheeks had color again. When she smiled, it lingered. James had started carving things. At first it was little wooden animals for the girls, bears, rabbits, a horse with a crooked tail. But one morning, Nora noticed him sitting by the porch, chiseling something longer, slower. A cradle. Larger than the makeshift one in the cabin. Shaped with care, smoothed at every corner, lined with small notches like tally marks, counting, perhaps, each day she'd stayed. He didn't show it to her. Just left it beside the fire one night without a word. She ran her hand over it gently, marveling at the feel of effort beneath her fingertips. He never asked if she liked it. And she never said thank you. Some things were too deep for words. Then, 3 riders came up the trail. She saw them first, standing at the kitchen window with a cloth in her hands. 3 figures on horseback, shadowed by morning fog. One wore a brown coat she remembered well, her brother-in-law Matthew. The others, cousins. Rough men with scarred hands and colder eyes. All carrying rifles. She dropped the cloth. Her hands trembled. The twins stirred in their cradle. James stepped onto the porch before they reached the gate. He didn't take his rifle. Just leaned against the post, arms crossed. The men halted 10 paces out. Matthew spat into the dirt. That woman inside belongs to our family. And those girls carry our blood. James didn't move. That so? Matthew's jaw worked. We don't want no trouble. We just came to take back what's ours. James' voice was calm as morning frost. She's not yours. She's not a thing to claim. She was married to my brother, Matthew growled. And those brats got his last name. Then your brother should have stayed alive, James replied. A pause. One of the cousins shifted in his saddle. The other clicked the hammer on his rifle. I don't want to see this go ugly, Matthew warned. James stared at him with that same quiet steadiness Nora had come to know. Neither do I. Another pause. Then James straightened from the post. Walked toward them. No gun. No anger. Just steps heavy with intention. You ride down this hill now, he said softly. Or I bury 3 more men before supper. The wind blew, thin and dry. Matthew hesitated. Looked toward the cabin window. Saw Nora staring back. His lips curled. She ain't worth it, rancher. Women like her, they ruin good men. James didn't blink. She's still more woman than you'll ever be man. That did it. Matthew yanked his reins. Turned. The cousins followed. 3 silhouettes swallowed slowly by mist and trees. James watched them leave. Then returned to the porch, stood silent for a long moment. Only then did he come inside. Nora hadn't moved from the window. Her breath fogged the glass. Her arms were crossed over her chest, as if bracing against something unseen. I didn't ask you to fight for me, she whispered. I didn't do it for you. She turned, startled. He looked at her. Steady. Kind. I did it, 'cause no one should ever have to beg to be left alone. She swallowed. Her voice broke. They'll come back. I know. And next time. They'll bring more. She nodded. Then said nothing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the rocker long after the twins drifted off, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress over and over. The fire snapped. Outside, the wind had changed direction. James sat on the floor near the hearth, sharpening his blade. I don't belong anywhere, she said quietly. You belong here. She looked down. I've never belonged anywhere, she whispered. Not with my husband, not in his family's house. I was something to marry. Something to carry children. That's all. James stood and walked to the stove. Poured warm water into her cup. You're not something, he said. You're someone. She took the cup with shaking hands. Sipped. Closed her eyes. I'm tired of running. Then stop. His voice was so simple, so sure, it felt like a truth the earth had known long before her. I don't know how. He crouched beside her. One knee on the floor, one hand on the edge of the cradle. You stay. That's how. Her breath caught. Then she turned to him slowly. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something older, rawer. A yearning that had no name. James didn't reach for her. He just sat there beside her, grounded as stone. She touched his hand. Their fingers didn't clasp. Just touched. And still, the weight of it knocked the air from her lungs. For the first time since her marriage, since her husband's death, since the rope burns faded from her wrists, she felt seen. Truly, silently, wholly seen. She looked down at his hand, calloused and still. I'm not ready, she whispered. I know. And I may never be. I'll still be here. She looked up. Why? He stood. Walked back toward the fire. Then said softly, because you stayed when you could have gone. She didn't know what to say. So she said nothing. In the days that followed, James didn't speak of the men. He added locks to the back window. Reinforced the porch post. Cleaned the rifle more than usual. But he also built the girls a playpen. And brought Nora yellow thread for sewing. She knew what he was doing. Not protecting the house. Protecting what had grown inside it. One evening, she watched him through the window as he fixed the fence gate again. The twins played beside her. The world was still. The sky a bruise-colored purple. He looked up once and saw her watching. She didn't look away. And in that gaze, held long and deep across glass and wind and everything unsaid, something passed between them. Not a promise. Not yet. But a beginning. One that would carry into spring. And change everything. The wind had changed. It no longer howled at the eaves like a wounded thing, it sighed. Soft and low, like the land itself was resting. The thaw had crept in quietly, loosening ice from the pine branches, coaxing green from under the dead grass. The world was shifting, and so was she. Nora stood on the porch barefoot, a baby on each hip, her eyes drawn toward the rising sun like a compass needle finding home. She didn't know when exactly the cabin had stopped feeling like a place she was hiding in, and started feeling like a place she'd been growing roots. Maybe it had been the cradle James carved, or the way the floor warmed in the morning light. Maybe it was how he called the girls our little thistles, rough things that survived storms. Or maybe it was the way he never once asked her for anything in return. Not a favor. Not a future. Only if she wanted to stay. That morning, she heard the knock. Not on the cabin door, but on her heart. A letter had come. Delivered by a red-faced clerk on a stubborn mule. A cousin from her mother's side, one of the few blood ties that hadn't vanished like smoke, had offered her a place. A house. A nursemaid. A claim of inheritance from a forgotten grandfather's estate. Comfort. A room of her own. A new name for the girls. A start, without James. She held the letter between her fingers like it might catch fire. James didn't react when she showed him. Just read it once, folded it, and handed it back with a nod. His eyes didn't falter, though they turned quieter than usual. He didn't ask her to stay. Didn't say her name. He simply stepped outside and began saddling her horse. By noon, her bag was packed. She sat with it on the porch beside the cradle, watching the sun stripe the trees. The girls napped beside her, one thumb tucked into her mouth, the other curled into a fist like she was preparing to swing at the world. James came up from the barn and placed a parcel beside her. Cheese, bread, water, a spare wool blanket. He didn't sit. Just nodded again. "You'll be all right," he said. She blinked slowly. "And you?" He looked toward the distant ridge. "I was all right before." She flinched. Not at the words, but the kindness he still managed to speak them with. "You're not going to stop me?" He shook his head once. "Was never my place." She stared down at the babies. "They like it here. They'll like wherever you are." She stood, unsure of how her legs moved. Each step felt heavier, like her bones knew something her heart hadn't caught up with. At the edge of the porch, she turned back. "Do you want me to go?" He met her gaze. And this time, something cracked in his face. Not weakness. Just truth. "I want you to stay," he said. "But only if it's what you want to." Her throat tightened. "And if I do?" "I'll build you a life," he whispered. "A quiet one. One you don't have to survive." Her knees nearly gave. James looked down at the girls. "You've got daughters that need a man who'll watch over them like sunrise and supper. And I've got hands that ain't done nothing good until you put 'em to work." She laughed through her tears. He stepped toward her then, for the first time not with stillness, but with fire in his chest. "The kind that doesn't burn, it warms." "I don't have a ring," he said. "But I've got a home that knows your name, and a fire that waits for your hands to stoke it. That's what I can give you." She dropped her bag. The sound was soft, but final. Then her face crumpled. Not in sorrow, but in surrender. To hope. To safety. To him. And when James reached out, she didn't flinch. She walked into his arms like a woman who finally believed she deserved to be there. He held her like she'd never been held. Not tight, but full. Present. Like he was making space for every part of her. The broken bits, the strong bits, the parts still learning how to breathe. The girls stirred in the cradle, blinking up at the world with the wide eyes of children who didn't know yet that people leave. But this time, no one left. The wedding happened 3 days later. Mrs. Eveline Parrish came, half in protest, half in curiosity. She brought pickled beets and a look that said "I told you so," even though she hadn't. The preacher was old and hard of hearing. He asked Nora to speak louder twice, and she did, with a trembling voice that finally knew what it meant to promise. James said nothing fancy. Just looked at her like she was the only thing left that made sense, and murmured, "I choose you. Every day, even the hard ones." They kissed. The girls squealed. The pine trees bowed slightly in the breeze. That night, they sat on the porch beneath a sky littered with stars. James had taken off his boots and leaned back against the railing, legs stretched out, hands behind his head. Nora sat cross-legged beside him, one baby asleep in her lap, the other curled at her feet. Neither spoke for a long while. Then James said, "You never told me what you wanted." "Not once." She looked over. "That's because no one ever asked. I'm a skin now." She smiled. "I want days that aren't loud. I want bread that rises, and girls who don't learn to shrink. I want a man who doesn't make me earn safety." He nodded. "Then that's what we'll build." She leaned her head on his shoulder. The fire inside the cabin burned low, but steady. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled and got no answer. Here, in this small corner of a wide and lonesome world, the silence held no sorrow anymore. Only peace. Only warmth. Only the sound of two daughters breathing softly beside two people who had finally found what they never dared to ask for. A home that stayed. Before you go, tell me, where in this wide old world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing how far these Wild West stories travel. And if this tale of quiet courage and second chances stirred something in you, leave a word for Nora. Or for the kind of man who doesn't need noise to be strong.